This is really good. So Melissa and I have been talking. So there's three areas I want to talk about when we talk about psychological being full, right? So when you're a kid, I have a theory. It's not based on anything. It's complete crap, but it helps me, right? And when you're a kid, there's three areas of your life. You have emotional, you have intellectual, and you have spiritual. There's three areas of your life. And what I try to tell people is like, look at those like tubes of resources. So if you are a spiritual person, you have a lot of stuff in that you can take on things in the world, and it depletes you, but doesn't deplete everything. Emotional and then intellectual. So let me give you an example. Most young boys are slow to develop emotionally because they're physical. So they're physical kids. So this is why I think boys and girls should be taught differently. They shouldn't be taught the same. Boys are physical, so they want to be outside. So they handle things physically. If they are interacting with something traumatic, like a psychological problem or an emotional problem, they don't have the resources built up to deal with it. So what do? They shut down, they play sports, they become violent, they respond because they're using their physical resources to try to work through a problem and pain. Okay, so listen. If that young man doesn't at some point start to work on the spiritual and emotional depletion, when they get to be adults, they're freaks. Okay, so let's say something dramatic happens to a young lady. Okay, let's say they divorce. Her emotional capacity is depleted. Okay, that if it happens very young, you cannot take on any more emotional trauma until you build up that emotional resource. In order to do that, you got to get that clear. So you offset that. Academically you hide, physically you hide. This is why a lot of young girls are having sex all the time, because they're compensating with their physicality to try to offset the emotional. So, right? So check it out. So as you get older, and I've had to do this too, right? I don't think, so you have to assess yourself, like, am I emotionally defective? Am I intellectually dominating to try to compensate with all these things? For me, I was emotionally defective. I was pretty intelligent, so I used that. But it makes you cold, makes you unable to feel, right? That was me. I could turn it off. It's weird. I can still do it. My wife will tell me, there's something weird about you, the way you can just turn yourself off. And you're just so pragmatic. Well, I'm depleted here, right? So physically, when I was a kid, I played a lot of sports, and then I used my mind to avoid any dealing with. So when I went to therapy for like, 2 years, I went there as to say, okay, look, I am defective here. I'm out of balance. My physicality kept me through when I was in high school and college because I could work out. Now that I'm a fat lawyer, I can't do that. My mind kept me here, but I'm still, something wrong with me here, and I didn't want to pass that on to my kids. I was defective. So how do you get here? Well, you got to go all the way back to when it depleted you. That's the problem. See, this is what happens. You can't start up here 30 years later. You got to go all the way back because that event was so traumatic that you haven't dealt with it. So here's some tips, right? This is what I do to help me. It may not help you, but this is good stuff, I think, right? So identify a traumatic event that is that requires emotional maturity. Okay, you got through it as a kid, but you may not have dealt with it with the type of trauma that it is. So if it's spiritual trauma, you got to have spirituality. If it's an emotional trauma, you got to have emotional maturity. You don't have that when you're 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. You just don't have it. So what happens is you go forward in life, you're still dealing with that old trauma using the wrong tools. We don't know how to deal with this stuff because it's not supposed to be that way, right? Divorce is horrible. It's not supposed to be that way. Whatever it is, abuse, whatever, it's not supposed to happen. So that wrong doesn't process in our minds because it's not supposed to be that way. Kids are not supposed to be abused. They're not supposed to be abandoned. They're not supposed to be in the middle. They're not supposed to navigate for adults. They're not supposed to do it. So when you put a kid in that middle, what do you end up having? You have these like children warlords over in Africa that are carrying machetes and stuff. Something defective happened there, and this is what you have. You have a kid who's defective who can't manage and carrying guns and they're killing people. That's crazy, right? So as you get older, your plate's full of all this stuff in life. You got to clear that space, the tube of emotional problems. You got to clear it so you can put the good stuff in there so you can move forward. That's why people get divorced like 50 times when they're so jacked up. It's because they got no space. So a problem comes along, they don't have any resources. They just, I can't deal with this, and they run away to something else. Well, what ends up happening? Now they got another divorce. It's a whole disaster. So you got to. It's what I call making an assessment. So in my house, with my girls, I say, okay, let's check here. What are your resources? What is your physical resource? What is your spiritual resource? And what is your emotional resource? Are you in a capacity to handle that problem emotionally? The answer to that is no. Well, we as parents step in and we help and shore that up. Not creating dependence, but creating panels and ways to deal with that stuff. Right? Okay, let me give you another perspective. That's coaching, that's parenting, that's teaching. Nobody wants to parent anymore because everybody wants to be their friend. Screw that crap. My friends are my friends. I got a job to do for them. I got to teach them how to take on the world so they're not defectives, because there's too many of them out there. And I don't want them stripping and crazy stuff like that. I just don't want that, right? Because they're getting back at daddy because daddy wasn't there for them, okay? So what I'm saying is, if you look at that and you know you're out of balance somewhere, you got to get professional help to know how to untangle and unclog the tube, because there's all kind of crap in there and the good stuff can't reach it. That's what I'm saying to you. The good stuff can't get there. So if you want the good stuff, you got to take that on.